I've been dialoguing with various people in the church who are, participating in this series. And one of the things that I've heard is questions. People wanting to be able to practice this, like longing for what this could look like, but hitting up against some obstacles and saying, well, in our family rhythm, how would that work because of these things? And so the reality is, Andrea and I are in a different season of life where we were empty nesters as of a couple years ago, apart from our dogs who are very cooperative. So it's easier for us to introduce Sabbath because we're dealing with two people's schedules and not a whole household. And so James and Amberlee have actually been practicing Sabbath for maybe 6 or 7 years now. And anytime I've talked about it, they just light up. They're like, oh yeah, Sabbath, right? And so I wanted to just come ask them some questions. Some of the questions I'm going to ask them today are ones that I've been hearing from others. We had a whole life group processing these questions together, not only to talk about the obstacles, but to brainstorm solutions to those things so that they could try it. And so I've asked James and Amberlee if they could come and just share with us a little bit. So can you guys welcome them? So how about start with this? Maybe you can tell us about your family. How old are your kids, and how many?
Yeah, so I am James. This is Amberlee. We've been married for 15, almost 16 years now. Time flies. And we have 2 incredible kids. They're in kids ministry right now. We have a daughter who is 10 and a son who is 8. And yes, I did practice all of those numbers beforehand, so I didn't get them wrong. Amberlee and I work together. She is my boss on some days, and I'm her boss on other days. We kind of flip-flop. And so we work from home, and we also homeschool. And so for me, a lot of times, getting out of the house is a little bit of a Sabbath. And so you'll hear some of that down later. But yeah, that's us, the Rich family.
Okay, so when did you start practicing Sabbath, and why?
Well, at first it was just a conviction. We both grew up in a Christian family, went to Christian schools, and I had never thought of keeping the Sabbath as like actually setting a day and doing something different. It was always in my mind, like just going to church was keeping the Sabbath day holy. I'm like, this is the easiest out of all of the 10 commandments. I can totally keep this. I just go to church every Sunday and I'm good. And we had this realization when, I'm a huge reader and I love to just learn about like how to have a better marriage and be a better parent and just in all different aspects of our lives. And we joined this Christian homeroom group. It's a mentorship program to really help us disciple our children and be a family team. And they had monthly challenges, and one of the monthly challenges was to practice the Sabbath and have a Sabbath feast meal. And I was just so convicted that we've never done this, and I've never even heard of anyone doing this before. And so that just gave us the first taste of it, and then from that point I was like, ooh, this is interesting. And so I started researching and reading and listening to sermons and podcasts, and it's grown from there.
Yeah, and early in our marriage we figured out that being okay with experimenting was great, because a lot of times we try to implement something in our life and we're like, okay, we're going to do this, and it becomes like this thing that we have to do. Right. But we found that approaching things as an experiment, the thing about an experiment is you can do it, and then if it doesn't work, you stop doing it, right. Or you tweak it, or you change it. Right. And so that's kind of the mindset that we had coming into our marriage, and even raising our kids is like, okay, let's just try it out, see how it goes.
Just try it on. I like it. So that was 2018, 2019 when you started. You're still doing this today. Why are you still doing it? What has kept you exploring and tweaking and implementing?
Well, because after a while, at first it's really hard, especially those of you workaholics. Anybody you just Saturday, for us we do it on Saturday. We'll get into that a little bit later, but I was like, I get so much work done on Saturday, right. And then I don't have to work as hard during the week. And so once we got past that, and this was something that Amberlee really pushed to implement, I was not excited about it. And let's see a raise of hands. How many of you guys are not excited about the idea of Sabbath? It's okay, yes. But coming from a recovering workaholic, it gives us so much life. We finish up our Sabbath right before dinner Saturday night. And so I come into church and I've noticed if I have a Sabbath or if I don't, I notice a difference of how well I interact and listen and worship, even in these services. Like a lot of these practices that we try and implement get just like poured out into my mind, and I'll be sitting over there and my mind will be just going 1,000 miles a minute, just like, oh, here's all these things that it just gets me so excited. I think we've kept it going because we've seen the benefits that have come out, and we didn't see them at the beginning. Like it was really hard, and some of that was because we were experimenting. We were trying to find what was working, what wasn't.
Yeah, and I think it's just been so life-giving. It's been the core of how we live life. Like it makes us live the rest of our days differently, knowing that we're going to have a true rest, not just for our body, but for our soul every week. It just helps me to realize that like I can do other things, and it just reorders the rest of the week. And I just feel like it's been helping us to not burn out. It helps us to say no to the right things, and that way we're able to say yes to the things that really are good for our family and for our faith.
The other thing is the day before Sabbath, I've really been noticing that I get so much more focused because I'm like, okay, I know I can't touch any of these tasks that I have up here. And so I've got to get these done as quickly as possible. And so there is somewhat of a preparation for Sabbath. And that's not just in our work. It's also around our house, preparing for Sabbath meal and all of those kind of things. So it does, Amberlee mentioned that it changes the way that we live our life. And it's not just at the beginning of the week right after Sabbath, but it's also at the end of the week right before Sabbath. Yeah. We have changed the way that we interact with life.
Yeah, and I had an aha moment this week just thinking about this topic. And when I look at this as a practice, it's not like you just do this once and you're good. It's like exercise. Like you have to be working on doing this on a continual basis. And when I look at giving, when I give, and this has always been a struggle for me, it helps me to trust God with my finances. And that's something I have to do on a continuous basis, because if I just do it once, it's not like, ooh, I'm good and I totally trust God forever and ever. Like it's something I have to do and keep working out. And I think that's part of like, we have to work out our faith. And the same thing with fasting. Fasting on a more continuous basis. I've been doing that this past year and it has been really life-giving. But it helps me to trust God with my physical health and my body. And connecting, not just knowing God, but actually experiencing Him with the temple that He has given me. And then when I look at Sabbath, it helps me to trust God with my work and with time. And that is something that is really a struggle for me, is to know where my time is going and to trust Him with work and with everything that He gives me. And so all of those practices, the more you add all those practices in, the easier it does become, but it also helps me to let go of the control of wanting to just figure it out on my own and releasing that control to God.
Yeah. I think it's really easy for us to look at whatever spiritual discipline we're looking at and lean towards the thing that's the easiest for us. Like for me, it was modeled, being wise with your finances and be a good steward. That was modeled to me as a kid. So that came naturally easy. So to me, I'm like, well, that's one of the most important spiritual disciplines. Right. And then when I really started leaning into the practice of Sabbath, I started realizing rest was not modeled to me. And even more so, if a spiritual discipline is difficult for you, that's the one that you probably need to lean into. And that's when I kind of had that switch in my mind of like, okay, I'm gonna lean into this because I know it is hard, but it's so rewarding.
So you're telling me to lean into dancing and poetry. I get it.
Very much, yes.
I heard it. As I'm dialoguing with people, hearing back from people, one of the questions that comes up is people are mentioning different obstacles that they hit, even in trying to anticipate how could we do this, or here's what we keep bumping up against. What obstacles, you guys have got like a 7-year track record now, what obstacles have you hit and how did you get over them?
I think getting started, like how do you actually do this? And it took a while for us to take that process of like, how do I actually put this into practice without it being weird? Like we didn't invite people into our Sabbath until probably a couple years in, because we were like, we don't want to weird people out.
Right.
But for some of it was figuring out, like, when should we do this? We tried a lot of different times of day. We tried different days of the week, but also different starting times. And it took a while. And the nice thing about Sabbath is it happens once a week. And so
Right.
you got 52 tries a year. And so if it doesn't work one week, you're like, okay, that's an experiment. Let's tweak it and try something different.
Yeah, I think the not being weird was one of my biggest obstacles. My first experience with a true... I know, I am weird.
All of life.
All of life, yes. But my first experience with Sabbath has always been more of the traditional, the Jewish Sabbath and all the rituals that happen. And to me, that always kind of just like turned me off, because I didn't want to have to read a language I didn't understand and didn't know. And I didn't want to do all these things that didn't have meaning to me. I wanted it to be something that we could invite a non-Christian in,
right.
and they would be like, that was really cool, which we've done. We've done in the past. We've had non-Christians join us for our Sabbath meal, and we'll talk about kind of what we do. But one of the things is we have somebody in the hot seat, and we put them in the hot seat. And the hot seat does not mean we catch your chair on fire. Right. You're the person for that week that we're just going to pour life into and speak goodness over you and see the things that we love about you and build them up. And so, I think the biggest thing, one of my biggest obstacles was I saw how Sabbath was done in the past, and I didn't like it. But then I also reading the books like Little House on the Prairie and Farmer Boy, and you read how they did Sabbath, and I'm like, that sounds awful. Absolutely terrible. Like, you just sit on a hard bench and like take a nap if you want, and we just read the Bible, and like that's pretty much it. There's no smiling. You can't smile on Sabbath.
Yeah.
And so that was the obstacle for me. But I think if we look at the Israelites, the obstacle for them coming out, even they had obstacles. They spent 430 years in slavery, and then they were released. Their whole identity was around how many bricks can you make,
right.
7 days a week for 430 years. They get out 3 months later, God's like, you need some parameters around this.
Right.
And he gives the 10 Commandments, and that's where he outlines. And if you look at it, it's like 32% of the 10 Commandments, word-wise, is associated around Sabbath.
Right.
And because they needed that understanding of what it looked like. And so, I think there's that mindset shift. And even when we read the Old Testament, we look at Sabbath a lot of times as very restrictive.
Right.
And you have to remember, again, like the Israelites just came out of 430 years of this constant work, and is like, okay, this is what it looks like to not work. You have to understand it. You don't do this, you don't do that. I think now we no longer need to live out of a restrictive perspective when it comes to Sabbath, but more of a permissive, like giving ourselves permission to do the things that bring us rest, joy, delight, what worships God through that process.
Yeah. Amberlee, what obstacles do you recall hitting?
Food was an issue. Trying to figure out, like, we wanted to have a big family feast. And so at first I thought, well, maybe it'd be a good idea for us to have like the same meal every Sabbath. And then I tried that, and I was like, that lasted like half a week.
For those of you that don't know, Amberlee was an art teacher, and so that might give you perspective as to sticking to one thing for forever. That felt like a restriction
It
to
boxed
her.
me in, and I was like, I do not like that. And so, yeah, our Sabbath meal is different each week. And, you know, I know for some people that's amazing. Like, they just get like pizza or something that's easy. Like, that's great. But that part was a challenge of figuring out, like, just the mechanics of how do I prepare to actually rest, and what do I do while I'm resting so that way it actually is restful. Like, especially, you know, when we started quite a while ago, like, I was a young mom, and like, I think when you're in that stage with young kids, you don't think about yourself and like what is filling you up. It's like you're focusing on helping everyone else. And so it was really a turning point for me to think about what does give me rest, and then having to explore that and try something and realizing that was not restful. Let me try something different next week.
Yeah. You know, that was one of the questions that came up in our dialogue was how, like, because that's a real practical reality. How do we, because a lot of the Sabbath practice involves feasting, but that's work to make a feast. So how do you do that? And so we'll get into the mechanics of that a little bit, but even as I shared last week, like, in our household, that's not my responsibility in a daily rhythm, and it's not my paid job. It's not my vocation. I enjoy cooking, so that's something I can do on the Sabbath, that I can do as a way to bless my family and create delight for others, and give Andrea a break from cooking. And so that's where we're trying to create an economy where together we're not just taking self-care, we're saying, how do we create Sabbath and bless one another and invite one another into it? Any other obstacles you guys want to hit before you describe a typical Sabbath?
I would just say phones, like the draw to social media and to just be on, I know it's just addicting to have a phone.
Right.
And so that was one thing that we really recognized early on, and it's still been a struggle. I mean, there's points that I actually lock my phone in our safe for the 24 hours because I know it's just like too tempting. I need more barriers. I have to put the code in to actually go and get it.
Right.
But we got a device about a year ago, I don't know.
Yeah, so Amberlee's a lot more disciplined around the phone issue. Like, she can put it in the safe, and I just like, I want to reach out to somebody. And I found this tension between, okay, don't use any device at all. And one thing that fills me up is connecting with people, like catching up with my roommates from college, or calling my dad, or whatever it is. And so, but when I would pull out my phone, then it would draw me into this kind of cycle of just all going into it. So we have searched and searched, and we found this little device that, much like the little stickers on the back of the chair, we go to it, we can set different modes. We have a Sabbath mode. We can go and we tap that, and then it locks down all the apps that you can't use. You go touch it, and what does it say when you say,
this is a distraction?
This is a distraction. It pops up, and you can't get to it. And so the Sabbath mode, I have texting available, phone calls, and maps. Sometimes we go out for an adventure or something,
right.
and it's so much easier. I pick it up, and it's just like a dumb phone, and like staring at a dumb phone doesn't do a lot for your dopamine, and so you put it down a lot easier.
Awesome. I think I need Sabbath mode all the time. Okay, maybe can you just describe, so you guys have been experimenting for several years now, what does a typical Sabbath look like for you today with what you said, a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old?
8-year-old.
8-year-old, okay.
Yeah.
What does it look like?
Yeah, well, I think first there's prep beforehand. Like, we have to get things ready to embrace Sabbath. One thing we've noticed is if our house is messy before the Sabbath, it's not very enjoyable.
I can ignore it. She can't.
I can't. And so we make sure that the house is clean. We've changed the rhythm. Before, our kids were cleaning the bathrooms on Tuesdays, and now they're doing it on Friday morning and afternoon. And so that way, like, all of that stuff is done. We make sure that we don't do our laundry during Sabbath. So, like, all of us need to make sure all of these things are prepared beforehand.
Yeah,
so
and
that's helped.
We don't do a sunrise, sundown, that kind of thing. We do dinner. Like, dinner introduces us on Friday night to Sabbath, and then it goes until once we go to eat dinner on Saturday. That's kind of when Sabbath ends for us. And so it's not whether it's not light or dark outside, like the traditional way.
So it's Friday night, dinner time. What does that look like? What happens?
So we added a new rhythm into ours, and this was from a couple of weeks ago. We talked about, I think it was Genesis 1:31. You talked about it today, and about how God, he created for six days, and then he looked at everything and he said, it is so good. And I had this idea sitting over here right after a Sabbath. I had an idea, and we implemented it. And the idea was, we have this task list inside of our shoffice. We have a backyard shed that we work out of, our company shed quarters. And we have started putting a list of all the things that we have to do for that week, and we cross them off as we go. So that list is still there. We see everything that was crossed off. And now to start the Sabbath, our rhythm is Amberlee and I walk in there, we look at this list and we see all that we have done, and we say, it is so good. And then we erase those things that we finished. We go in the house, we sit down, Amberlee lights the candle, and we start our meal. And that's kind of what starts, that's a new part of our practice, starting with the candle. We've been doing that for years.
Yeah, so what we do is we've had the kids really be part of the process. So we have them set the table, and we have a tablecloth, and we have 3 different tablecloths. So the kids get to choose the tablecloth. They set the table. So it was good for us to like train them on how to set the table and get things prepared. We have a candle, and when I light it, typically the mom does it, and that signifies that you're done with working for the next 24 hours. And the kids have done this, like when I'm like doing way too much throughout the week, they've done this on occasion. They'll bring the Sabbath candle to me, and they're like, "Mom, you need to light this candle." And they know that, like, okay, I'm like, oh, I need to slow down and
feedback.
Yeah. So that's Friday evening, but the thing that we have our own filter. Our own filter when it comes to Sabbath is, does it glorify God? And does it bring us life? Mm-hmm. And so you'll see this a lot, especially in our next day. So on Saturday...
Well, I think we still should talk about the feast.
Okay, sorry, go on.
So with the feast...
Rob, could you put that slide up for that filter?
So with our feast, what we do is a lot of times we'll eat on china. We'll have cloth napkins. A lot of times, like, we'll just have the nicest meal, and we have a lot of food. Like, I want to make as much as possible, so that way, even if someone just randomly showed up, there would be plenty of food. And it also makes sure that we'll have leftovers for the following day, so that it's like, it really does help, and it helps me think when I'm going grocery shopping, like, I want to make sure we save the best food for the Sabbath. And we have just a wonderful time with our family, and we do bring people in somewhat frequently. But one of the things that we do is we ask, what were the highlights of this week? And so we get to reflect on the highlights of this week. Then we also have someone who's on the hot seat, and we just do it from oldest to youngest. But when we have someone come and join us for the Sabbath, we put them on the hot seat. And then at the end, James blesses each of the kids. So he has them sit on his lap, and he prays a blessing over each of them. He prays a blessing over me, and then I pray a blessing over him. And then when we have people over, we often pray a blessing over those people as well. And so it really is a sweet time, and it is different than the rest of the meals that we have as a family.
Yeah, and so here's a couple of pictures. Here's one, and then the next one, just kind of showing variety. A lot of you guys know these two. They're sitting back there. Hi, guys.
Sabbathing with the non-Christians. I see that.
And then the next one, this is a picture of another set that are in here. Are they here today?
They're in Salt Lake.
Oh, they're in Salt Lake. Okay. And then finally, last one, the cool thing about Sabbath is it doesn't always have to be at your house. So those of you that know, we took a 2 month, it felt like 2 years, 2 month sabbatical, and we lived on a ranch in the middle of the Ozarks. And so we brought Sabbath with us. And so you can bring this rhythm everywhere you go.
It's portable.
It's portable.
Yeah. And it just helped us to figure out, like, well, how can we make this work? So, like, our kids picked flowers from the garden. This was a table that they had 2 tables on this ranch. And so this was like a big one that we never ate at except for the Sabbath.
Yeah, and then Saturday morning we sleep in as long as possible. We keep that clear. In our calendar is clear on Saturday. We'll do Bible reading and journaling. I'm dyslexic, and so me just sitting down and reading the Bible is not restful at all. But pulling up the Bible Project and watching that with the kids and us, like, just taking that in, that is, it kind of goes for my filter. Does it glorify God, and does it bring us life? And it does. And this week, it was a little bit different. We were sitting there, Jonathan was playing with Legos, my son was playing with Legos. I was over on the couch just sitting there kind of relaxing. Amberlee was in bed reading a book, and Selah was doing something else. And then Jonathan just pipes up. He's like, "Dad, I want to hear more jokes, but I don't want to hear the ones that you already have said." I was like, okay. I was like, "What kind of jokes?" And he's like, "Well, poop jokes." And so we pulled up the laptop. I looked it up, and we had bathroom humor. I'm not going to repeat any of them. They're kind of hard to get out. But like that, we just find things that we can delight in, and we went down a rabbit hole for like an hour and a half of just reading these absolutely ridiculous jokes. But there's other weeks that it looks a little bit different. Like when the sun's out, we'll get the bikes out. We'll go on a ride down the green belt. We'll stop for donuts at Guru Donuts, and we'll bring board games, puzzles, and we'll just, whatever it is that is going to bring us life. That's what we're going to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. One last question: how do your kids feel about Sabbath?
They love it. I mean, we asked them both, and what is your overall, like, what do you love the most about Sabbath? And they both said rest, and that all of us are resting together, that we all are able to have time together.
Yeah, our daughter said, I love that we don't work. I was like, oh, you don't like doing the chores and things? She's like, well, yeah, but I love that you don't work. And I said, well, why do you love that I don't work? She said, because we get to spend more time with you.
Yeah.
And so it's been this rich, beautiful thing for our family that's bringing life and also glory to God and all at the same time.
That's awesome. Thank you.